Khalid Raza. Welcome. So great to see you, Khalid.
It's good to see you, Nick.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this, and actually, just I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have, during the podcast. So I know that you were kind of under the weather, but hopefully that you're back, at least hopefully 90% and kind of ready to go.
I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go.
Okay. Awesome. Great. Well, what we've been doing with the Built for Trust podcast, are kind of introducing people that they might have heard of, maybe seen, exchanged some pleasantries, maybe even been in meetings with, but they don't really get to know them. And so that's what we want to do with these podcasts. So, like first, I thought it'd be really good. So we've known each other for a long time, and I've always been a fan of the work that you've done and the contributions you've made, to the industry. But so I'd like to have everyone kind of get a perspective of your journey, and kind of, where I got to know you probably more was not from your days at Cisco, but really from your days at Viptela. But why don't we go back, and just give everyone an idea of your journey, and how you've kind of navigated the industry and what you've done.
So started with Cisco and started to work with internet service providers by 1994. So I always tell people the first time I saw an internet routing table, it had 20,000 routes. Worked with all the major service providers, their backbones. I'm a routing guy through and through. Around 2008, 2009, I started to pitch the idea of SD-WAN inside of Cisco and said, look, MPLS has served its purpose, but people are looking for more bandwidth, augment bandwidth to their wide area because the workloads are increasing. And to my good luck, nobody listened. So pitched it for about 3 years and left Cisco in 2012, started with Viptela. And the idea around Viptela was very simple. People want commodity bandwidth to augment their MPLS, number one. Wanted application visibility, and enterprises want the policy control back. Those were the three drivers when we started the Viptela journey. That was my entrances to SD-WAN. Fast forward to 2017, Cisco acquired Viptela, went back to Cisco and said, guys, the problem statement of 2012 does not hold true anymore. Why? Because the cloud is disaggregating data. There are no two data centers, there are centers of data now. And that disaggregation of data would require us to relook at the WAN architecture because you can't continue to build overlay tunnels. And I'm hoping again that I'm lucky that Cisco didn't listen again this time. And I left and I said, we actually need to solve the problem at more granular level, both at the enterprise and service providers. People are building their service over the top of service providers. So I always look at these things from a routing guy's perspective. And I said, there are so many great knobs which routing can become a participant in, not just overlays, underlays, and also active participant in security, policy, and visibility. So that's the whole context of Graphiant, saying we need to evolve SD-WAN. We need to evolve some of the routing functions and build a very stateless infrastructure in the underlays of service providers, because the data disaggregation is driving it so much differently. And my theory, I'm so excited, my theory is getting even more and more validated. I started with cloud, edge computing, and now agentic AI. It is all about data, how data will connect. That's the most exciting part. And data should remain in transit. Data should not be touched. And at the network layer, it should be at the security and services layer. So that's my theory. And I think that AI is going to be one of the most exciting things for the networking guys.
Yeah. Okay. Good. We're gonna talk about that, in a little bit. So, but thanks for sharing, that journey. And I think, to me, I think the turning point for me was like in the early days of ONUG, and this had to be around 2012, like 2013. There were two people that that really, I think, influenced the community to to invest in SD-WAN. And one was Michael Elmore, and I remember it was a private conversation, a private meeting where Mike was at Cigna at the time, and he gave this presentation of why he was going down this road. And I'll tell you, he got his ass handed to him. It's like a lot of people were like, not sure why you're doing it, why you're putting all that. There's a lot of risk. You're putting a lot of money or a lot of your infrastructure in the hands of a little unknown company called Viptela. But he held his own, and he just like methodically, went through it and discussed his use cases and his thinking, at the time. And I think I'm not sure if he changed everyone's mind in that meeting, but I think slowly as time progressed, it did. It was like one of those pivotal, meetings that was again. It was like we when we were running the program back then, we would have sessions that were only open to like IT executives, and that was one of those meetings. We since we still do that, but like to a lesser degree, now. But I think that was a pivotal moment. And then there was another one, and I'm so disappointed in myself. I can't remember his name, but it was a guy from NYU, and we were. It was kind of a whole bunch of us on the board that we were meeting for to kind of plot out the direction for the next year, and he was invited as a special guest, and we were all putting together use cases on okay, what were the most important things that we should put the kind of the influence of the community behind, and everyone was kind of focused on data center at the time, except for this one person, and he was like, no, this is the wide area, and this needs to be, he didn't use software defined, but he used, the whole wide area needs to be transformed and changed, and control needs to be put back into the hands of the consumers on that. And that was also, so those two meetings to me were pivotal. That they kind of aligned with kind of the engineering that you were thinking of and seeing in the early days, and that kind of helped kind of take off. And then obviously you guys were very instrumental in the early days of ONUG and the ONUG community, and then I think together as a community we really grew that marketplace.
Yeah.
In the NAS market, now it's different though. So I want to talk a little bit about why it's different, and why there isn't that same kind of epiphany and excitement, in the marketplace. But I think, but let's talk a little bit more about, I think, like, what you're seeing, as we transition from kind of the SD-WAN marketplace into, the whole NAS marketplace, with Graphiant, has been championing for the, since its inception, as well. So like from an engineering point of view, what are some of the key, like you walked away with SD-WAN with only like a few major, and most markets are like that. You only have a few major things that need to be changed and that articulate, and there's a whole bunch of ripple effect that goes along with that. But so what are you seeing now as kind of the two or three key things that is really going to that needs to change in the marketplace, and that's why most companies will move towards a NAS model versus a kind of an older SD-WAN or MPLS model.
So my take on this is the wide area has to become a fabric. It's a pub sub model now. An agentic
Yeah.
AI, the publisher will publish and subscriber will subscribe. It could be an AI agent, it could be a cloud location, it could be a B2B partner. But I look at it very slightly differently. I think service providers have an opportunity of a lifetime and they're missing out on it.
Mm.
One of the things we did at Graphian, we took BGP is a 30-year-old database, but it's a database. It has
Mm.
extensibility. If I take that database out from every router along the way and map that database to a policy through metadata and translate
Mm-hmm.
that metadata into an MPLS label, I can integrate this architecture so seamlessly. And that database can run in a microservices. Today, you tell me to scale BGP to 1 million routes, I can. And if you ask me to scale it to 5 million, I can do it in 10 minutes because it's microservices.
Mm.
Modernizing that. Now, once I have that routing in out of every router along the way, I tie it with a metadata, which is a policy construct. So I map routing to
Yeah.
policy now. And that policy can get translated into any IP VPN, ideally with MPLS VPN. Now,
Yeah.
when I
So when you're
map that,
saying policy, when you're saying policy, though, Khalid, so my mind kind of goes to two different things. There's ACLs, and there's also business policy. Um, Kind of where on that spectrum are you?
it's more of a business policy.
Perfect.
And
Okay, great.
especially the way
Yeah.
things are changing now.
Hmm.
State actors are saying, I'm not going to take this path because I don't trust this path over the network because I don't trust the Chinese. And Chinese are saying, I don't trust the US. So there is a
Hmm.
construct that is happening that people want to avoid certain paths. Certain countries have different encryption regulations. So I should have the ability to decide how I'm going to build that path. And literally, I talk to service provider and says, guys, you have a gold mine in MPLS VPN.
Hmm.
Reconstitute this whole service policy layer and convert that into a NAS. Now, the biggest challenge is if I carry this whole policy in every router along the way, then I
Hmm.
have a state bloat problem.
Yeah.
People took SDN, in my opinion, SDN as a provisioning and visibility problem. I take SDN as a state abstraction problem. So every router along the way not carrying state, just carrying metadata, gives the policy control back into the hands of enterprise, and now they're programming a service provider network the way they want to consume it.
Yeah. I
Graphiant
like
has
that a lot. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
so Graphiant has deployed POPs in US, and we have some global POPs as well on carrier neutral facilities. But now I'm going to service provider by service provider and saying, guys, what you missed last time, why you
Mm.
became irrelevant, you are not in the data economy. You're in
Mm.
connectivity. We will
Mm.
get you into data economy. People care about where their data is, how it's moving, where it's moving. The countries are not talking about their data sovereignty laws. They're talking about data regulations such as where the data is residence, where data is localized. That whole construct of data is should be the centered around networking. And by
Mm.
making fewer modification to these protocols, you can actually translate that routing into a metadata, which translates into a label, and you have complete visibility of everything, how it's happening. Your routers become smart participant in security, visibility, observability than just dumb forwarding devices. So
Yeah.
that's the whole model around Graphian's NAS. I want NAS to be more data centric, not connectivity centric.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great perspective and a great strategy because I think what resonates with me, from what I've heard, from our community, is they want that abstraction because like if now all of a sudden you abstracted you have policy depending upon how you're defining the metadata and how that metadata now interacts with BGP, then you free up a couple of different key things. One is that developers can now access the routing infrastructure through policy.
Exactly.
So it can be part of CI/CD, pipelines. If we think about kind of the whole DevOps, kind of model. The other thing too is as we start to really think about agentic AI and agentic AI models, then those models, if we trust them, can now actually interact with policy, state new policy, and impact the behavior, of the network. The other, I think probably maybe one of the bigger, activities with that is that it provides a mechanism for applications now to communicate directly to the infrastructure. Right.
Absolutely.
So the
You're
applications can
100
request services. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm
Yes,
sorry, Khalid.
yes.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. That was the next point I was about to make. The network should not be application aware. The application should be network aware.
Yeah.
And in that case, network just publishes its characteristics. It's a pub sub model. Network provides those, and those metadata in our today environment is so simple. MPLS labels are generated as metadata, and I simply take it to BGP and translate that and give it to the application and says, now you have complete visibility of the network the way you want to run it. And the networking
Yeah.
guys just become part of this whole. data journey as data travels, data policy could be. I can literally, by flipping a label, I can change your topology without ever reconfiguring a router.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's huge. I think the where the power of this really comes from is kind of the enablement, and it's enablement of the infrastructure, not at just the hands of kind of network operations, folks, but it's also of whether those are kind of developers or the applications itself, after they have been written and then deployed, and then also agents, AI agents, too. So it does set up a new kind of model on how networks are built, and more importantly, really how they're configured and how they're optimized. So I can even imagine too, and you probably have thought about this, is that as this can also be a mechanism or an architecture that allows kind of the networks to make routing decisions well beyond just the cost of a hop, right? So it's like you can have a security posture, of a particular route on an end-to-end, basis. You can actually look at the real dollars associated with that particular link. You can look at the latency associated with that link or various different routes, and then have the network kind of make the appropriate decisions based upon that. So I think it has the opportunity to fundamentally change the way in which networks behave and how we modify that behavior based upon parameters that are being dictated by policy. And I think is that kind of in your cards, around how you see this?
That's exactly what we're doing. You're 100% correct. And to me, I mean, the idea of single shortest path route does not hold true anymore. I should be able to say,
Yeah.
this is HIPAA data. This can't leave California, state of California. This is GDPR data. Interestingly, if we did a single shortest path route, a route between two cities in Germany might go through Czech Republic. But I
Right.
should define that this is HIPAA data, this is financial data, this can't leave. So from
Yeah.
all of that architecture, you're spot on that I can bypass certain countries. I can decide to a point that I feel that I do not want to take a service provider where Huawei is in the path. There is a
Mm.
distrust between US and China at this point to this level. And
Yeah.
all of that control, the path control, the whole policy control, again, is in the hands of the users of the application,
Mm.
the AI agents, that whole architecture. Routing guys have a lot to offer. We have the tools. We never focused how we can actually put this few modifications to BGP, literally few modifications to BGP, and you have a magical infrastructure which is programmable with
Yeah.
MPLS VPN.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. There's one other point. There's a whole bunch of kind of synapses that are kind of firing in my head right now. But like, one that you mentioned is the service providers. Actually, I was on a call with, I won't mention, the name of the company or like the executive, but it was the person who ran the enterprise business at, one of the top three service providers. And they were talking about, doing a keynote at the AI networking summit coming up in Dallas. And they wanted to talk about kind of edge and how their services could enable kind of AI and cloud at the edge. And so what we were saying, okay, that sounds great. Can you bring, what about, won't you bring, a customer or two to kind of talk about it? Like, oh, we don't have any yet. We're just kind of floating this idea. We're not quite sure what the model is yet. And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
it goes to like what you were just talking about. It's like they, I don't want to pick on the service providers, but they tend to like, maybe they're just so removed from the real customers, that they don't kind of see the trends and they don't see really what's being required. And they need to really partner better with companies like Graphiant and others who are much closer to customers and to kind of take those services that they envision, or maybe that they're starting to hear about. I'm not sure where they're getting their data from, but it's like they need better sources of data about what are the major use cases, before they kind of come to market. So anyway,
And,
just so that
you're,
was
you're,
one of my synapses.
you're spot on. And that has been my challenge when I'm talking to service providers. And if you don't get into data economy, over the top guys will eat your lunch.
Yeah.
And you're still obsessed with connectivity, Does anybody care on connectivity when you on ramp to that service? Does Google care about connectivity? But Google is in data business. If you don't
Yeah,
get into
yeah,
data business, you will be completely obliterated. And that's what I
yeah,
feel what service providers are not getting. They have the infrastructure. They're not looking at infrastructure as a data point. They're looking at infrastructure as just another connectivity, and I can offer you network as a service. Tell everybody, Graphiant is not trying to do network as a service. Graphiant is trying to do data network as a service. It is
yeah,
about the data,
yeah.
the value of the data, and how it connects and where it's consumed. It's so critical.
Yeah, well, I love the focus on data and control, and the opening up of that control plane to other entities. I think that's kind of like spot on. That makes a total amount of sense. So if we now all right, so now we have this architecture. You have policy, you have metadata, you have BGP, and then that kind of is influencing the routes of all of the routers that are in the network. So um, have there been particular use cases that you've seen, maybe around resiliency, capacity planning, optimization, clearly around security, that have, been resonating or that you're seeing kind of boil up to the top?
Yes. So
Yeah.
if you look at it, like I earlier said, when you take the state out from every transit device, your capacity planning becomes it's a much easier problem to solve. For example, if I am offering you a VPN service today, IP VPNs or MPLS VPNs, the customer profile is locked into a hardware device. In Graphian case, it's not. The customer profile is locked
Yeah.
into this service layer that we put that is just sitting outside of your transit point. So from planning perspective, the thing that I have to worry about, do I have any capacity available in any other points in my network? And I do not have to provision it. I was doing a demo for a service provider recently, and I showed them when we brought up our data plane devices. So data plane is going to sit in service provider pods because data plane will
Hmm.
connect all these data points. 30 lines of config, and he can bring up 100,000 VPNs. That's it.
Mm.
Thousands. And now, from that
Wow.
perspective, if
Mm.
this box runs out of capacity, I have the complete view of all the other data plane devices in my environment. It's like I can move this around wherever I want to because wherever there is capacity available. If it's a latency issue, if it's a high paying customer, I can move a low paying customer to a lower latency pattern, give the high paying customer wherever the capacity is needed. So it's such a
Mm.
flexible architecture. Again, I go back to the SD-WAN, where I was inspired by SD-WAN guys is state abstraction. If I'm not getting any customer state in transit, I can do much more capacity planning. I can monitor my data much better. I can provide all those functionality for enterprise to observability perspective. Graphian gives you complete visibility of how our network is routing your traffic. And
Mm.
nobody else sees it, only you see it because you know your metadata that got translated and it's traversing the network. So if somebody hacks into a Graphian network, we don't know anything about source less IP, but customer knows their metadata and they can track the whole traffic. So from that
Mm.
perspective, that capacity planning, we showed this demo to a customer that we kept on failing their devices. A pop failed, a router failed, a pop failed, and within second it started to do its backup connections, and convergence was literally in milliseconds. So
Mm.
architecturally, we had all these things. We had segment routing, we had MPLS VPNs, we had BGP. We were not tracking data. With this
Yeah.
whole data service tracking and capacity planning and visibility, I can show you exactly what's happening to your traffic, wherever it's going, and your data, where it's going and how it's consumed and connected.
Okay.
So,
So maybe go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish
go
your
ahead.
thought. No, by all means. I interrupted you. Sorry.
So for my perspective, if we truly focused on doing proper SDN, and I had one of the most interesting conversation with Scott Schenker from Berkeley around this about 2 years ago. That whole
Hmm.
idea was state abstraction. It got converted into an automation problem,
Hmm.
which we are now saying if the state is abstracted properly, you can do so much with the way data needs to be consumed, why the capacity planning needs to get done, how you can solve provisioning problem. You never provision a Graphian router once you're done in the data plane. by just saying
Mm,
this is the internal interface and these are external interface, and you're done for life if the same internal
yeah,
interface needs to be moved around 50 different locations. You just don't need to
yeah,
reconfigure it, because this is, in my mind, that was the concept of SDN. The data plane should not have
yeah,
state, and it becomes a much simple and much more secure problem. Anybody breaches
mm,
our router, it has no visibility, and the metadata is integrity protected. If you touch it, the data is dropped.
mm, yeah. Okay. So a couple of quick questions. So, with the service provider model that you were talking about a second ago, so you kind of talked about this, I'm going to call it an architecture. Do you actually label that, kind of the policy, the metadata and BGP? Has that been branded a certain product, or do you call it anything?
We're not, the whole data model is we calling data assurance, from the
Data
way you track.
assurance. Okay.
So the idea of
Okay.
data assurance is your edge router is an active participant of security. Your core
Yeah.
routers is an active participant in your policy and visibility. So everything that you decide by the policy, it's visible, and we will assure your data how it traverses the network. So, from my perspective, this whole metadata is tying the data to actually the subscriber and consumer of data, and
Yeah.
that gives power back in the hands of enterprise. I want to give power
Yeah.
of enterprise the way they are programming cloud. They should be able to program my network and any service provider's network. Let Don't wait on
Yeah.
service
Well,
provider. You should.
yeah, well, I think they will. I think you're giving them the tools to do that. Yeah, I guess what I was getting at is that I wonder, like, have you developed like templates, like, for the service providers to kind of take, to take your architecture and that they can now start to build a business out of it, or is that up to them to kind of do it, And also in the large enterprise too, they may not kind of like have a model for, creating the metadata. So maybe is there a library that Graphiant offers to them, and even a library on, existing policies, that they can kind of review and pick and choose and see which ones they might want to use or may not, want to use.
Yeah. So today we're providing the libraries and on policies. But the long-term
Uh-huh.
plan is, yeah, we will start to create libraries on those metadata and on the
Yeah.
policies. But today we give you libraries. You can actually program policy the way that you want to consume that our network. And we are now deploying in
Yeah.
few global service provider their networks, the way you want to construct your policy. But my goal is long-term, that metadata could be a very intelligent point, and that metadata should be a policy library that can that can actually simply get translated into a forwarding label. And the people do not have to upgrade their Cisco or Juniper routers with their running
Yeah.
MPLS VPNs. Just create this metadata service layer around it. And you can run
Yeah.
massive scale new networks, data centric.
Yeah. Be interested, like, if that was like, kind of, I'm not sure. I'm going to, I'm not suggesting this, but I'm just kind of like suggesting it for thought. If that was open sourced, so that lots of others can kind of contribute to, the metadata. So you have this big library. There's a Git repo, on that, where people can kind of choose and choose and use it. And the same thing like on policy. Policy is always kind of, it's a difficult thing for some. They're kind of so worried about getting it right, and they're worried about consequences, for it. So anyway, just some food for thought. I think, over time, what what this architecture I think allows is lots of different kind of business models to take hold. And I think the one that probably makes the most sense in the short term is that you all have libraries that you're able to, that you might have developed for a group of companies, and that you might be able to share that with a broader range of customers. And even if you kind of kept that, maybe it's not open source, maybe that's a proprietary library that is licensed from Graphiant. That might be another way to kind of do it, so you maintain that value that you put into it. Um, but okay, so anyway, so I think that I was kind of
You
going
bring up
down
a
that road with that.
you do bring up a very interesting point, and it is part of our thought process. Ultimately, the Graphian's goal is to this massive control plane scale in the cloud, microservices based, and all the services policy construct, we will publish our work. We just want 2 years advantage, then we will publish all our work. We do intend to
Hmm.
publish all our work.
Yeah. Yeah, and no, I think that's great. Yeah, I think whatever really kind of works, to increase options and choices. And I think in this model of the industry where everything is really kind of fluid and moving really fast, the more choices and flexibility there is, I think the better consumers are going to be served, and then you will be served, as well as a supplier. So,
Yeah.
I think I want a shift a little bit. So, like, I think we were talking, or you were kind of talking security from the point of view of like the infrastructure as being secure. Um, there's there's another kind of thought, in the industry that we really haven't seen championed by many in the networking company. I wonder, like, what your thoughts on this are, and that is to really have a a firm definition around identity. So it's not even just okay. Well, we've had some definitions of identity that kind of they take the person and their credentials and the device in which they're using, and then that gets mapped into roles, and that allows access to particular things. That tends not to work as well. And so the other thinking is to add another layer to that, and that is okay. It's the user, it's the device, and it's the applications that they use, and then that gets applied to roles, and so that now this infrastructure that is programmable, if you can, now kind of maybe there's a module that is connected into the policy that is driven by identity, then all of a sudden the need for doing all this microsegmentation all across the infrastructure, and the blast radius, is immediately reduced, to individuals, and not broader, broadcast domains that we used to think about in VLANs, and in the data center. So anyway, so I'm wondering, the architecture is intriguing to me. It's generating all these different ideas, So I'm wondering if you've been giving any thought to, or you've been hearing from the industry, the need for identity to be attached into this infrastructure.
So I'm actually trying to have this discussion with SASE vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think they are at that control. They sit at the edge. They control the user application connectivity. What I want to offer to those guys is saying, guys, you are in the endpoint devices. You have all the visibility application. There is a big piece inside of the network which would not, in my opinion, would not have as much agentic model. Agents would be the IoTs. I want to be
Yeah.
your partner for IoT services that I can. Graphiant router becomes a subscriber to a SASE service provider and says, I will take all the IoT devices and get you
Oh.
to the SASE, so that you don't have to have that much agent deployed in. IoTs will never have agents. Router
Mm-hmm.
can become a participant in the SASE. So I'm trying to SASE guys and saying, you can program my metadata and use user-centric and application-centric connectivity. I can give you that ability to divert traffic from all the non-user based devices into your SASE workloads, because today you don't control those. So this explosion of device application connectivity, if SASE guys work with the routing guys, I think we have a very, very good story to start protecting the entire ecosystem
Yeah.
around users, applications, devices, endpoints, and have this whole correlation. If I think this is vulnerable, I'll take you to SASE. If I think I have the application profile on both ends, doesn't need to go to SASE. So if routing and security tie together, SASE and what my data network security is, I think we have a much, much more powerful solution. And I'm just trying to give a platform to anybody to launch the service, and I will get your data to you, whether it's going to SASE, whether it's going to cloud,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's going to anywhere, and I'll give you control how you want to route that data back into this fabric that we're trying to build. I want to offer platform to all the players who are either in the security or in
Mm-hmm.
the cloud infrastructure. I just want to give you the visibility and control of your data through this metadata policy constructs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good model. That's a broad addressable market, to apply. So that's interesting. So yeah, so I think on the identity part of that, yeah, so that would be okay. Well, does this data go to a SaaS provider? Does it go into, kind of a private data center? Is like, where does it go? And then you facilitate, that kind of connectivity on behalf of, I guess the endpoints, if it's an IoT world. Yeah, so I think, another, kind of thinking here is that, and I think you do have an architecture, Khalid, in Graphiant that is much more flexible than I thought a half hour ago. So I think that's really great, because there's, and I think you sense this, and we've talked, we're in a pretty large hype cycle around the AI space. But I don't think it's unjustified, either, and especially you've mentioned agentic a few times, and the whole agentic AI stuff, is starting to come online little by little. I think NVIDIA's library of agents is probably one of the most impressive, agentic AI, assets, within the industry. But to me, I think what we're hearing a lot of discussion about is how the agentic AI marketplace will disrupt enterprise software. So all of the system of records, whether that's ServiceNow, or it's Salesforce, or any of the large kind of silos within an organization, and the software ecosystem that supports those. How agentic will now start to really kind of look across an organization, look at its business logic, and then be able to look at workflows and optimize that. And I think in there, as we start to move down that road, then traffic patterns will fundamentally change. Your whole data story becomes extremely important, because right now these silos restrict the movement of data from one silo to another silo. If you eliminate those silos, then new kinds of applications can be written that have a lot of deep information about maybe customers or competitors, or existing products, enhancing existing products. You can get an enormous, not only efficiency but business value creation. That is, I think, what people are really kind of excited about. And whether the existing enterprise software manufacturers are part of that solution set or not is really, I think, left to be seen. But I think in there, that's, it's that fundamental change that's kind of almost like the rewiring and the rethinking of the enterprise on what it takes to operate a large enterprise today could really fundamentally change in a pretty quick time, because I think the way that this marketplace, the AI marketplace, is evolving is very, very different than the cloud, right? Like the cloud providers was very top down, right?
Yeah.
It was like, it probably has got to be, north of about $100 billion, from like 2008, to like now around marketing, right? They had to convince large enterprise, oh, this is going to be cheaper, it's going to be faster, it's going to be more secure, it's like, they had to be convinced, and it took a long, long time and a lot of pain to do that. And they're still like, they made inroads, but it's like, still like, the vast majority of applications are still within, private data centers.
Yeah.
But AI is different. It's very internet or related, right? It's like when you and I, in the very beginning days of the internet, it wasn't this top down model. It was a very bottom up, model where, it's like, hey, I want to gain access to Motif, and Firefox and all these web browsers, and start, searching and using email. And it was really organic within organizations. That's exactly how AI is right now. And so the uptick is going to be so much faster than the cloud era, really was. Yeah. And that's why I'm thinking, there is I think you have, Graphiant has, from just this quick conversation, you have a flexible model for that transition, that's happening. You may not be articulating it in that way, or maybe thinking of it, in that way, but that's what it seems like to me. That there's a fundamental transition that's happening. No one in our industry, in the networking industry, has really been talking about it, and talking about how um, compute model, not just AI, but even like quantum. Like we have 5 quantum chips, now announced since November. Like since November, 5 quantum chips, and so that's still some time away. But there is so much change going on, and there hasn't been from the networking industry people to really start stand up and articulate a vision for how networking is going to change to address this change in computing. So sorry for that really long, it wasn't a tirade, but kind of like that's my internal thinking about what's happening right now.
You're 100% giving my talk track. One of the things I'm going to people and service providers and enterprise and saying the internet for AI is very different than internet of content. The internet of AI
Mm,
is much, much more dynamic, and it's much more centered around data. And that
mm,
access to data, like your agent, one that orchestrate might be accessing 15 different databases before it makes a decision. And some of those databases and some of those data points might be an IoT camera. And that whole
right.
construct
Mm,
of accessing that data and then coming up with a real-time action, that's the biggest difference that AI would take an action on the data that it
mm,
has retrieved. If there is a malicious actor in there, that could be very, very disruptive to any enterprise's business. Have we thought through about how that security access happens? How we thought through that data chain between those two endpoints, how it should be monitored and observed. All those things are so critical. And at this point, it's a fabric, which is a pub sub model. So if you look at my
mm,
BGP architecture, my BGP just became a broker between a subscriber and
yeah.
a publisher. And also a publisher could be a subscriber and subscriber could be a publisher. So it is anywhere to anywhere connectivity model, which
Mm,
both have to be protected. And one of the things we do with this whole metadata tagging, the service is available, but it's not visible unless that it is agreed upon at the higher level of brokering. Saying, I am
mm-hmm,
sitting here, but you don't know because I'm not hiding behind an IP. I'm hiding behind a metadata to which there is an encryption attached to it. If you don't get that, you will never be able to find me. And the underlying
mm,
infrastructure, since it doesn't carry IP, it carries metadata. I don't know where that metadata is. I can never get you there. So
mm,
this whole data source able to control how I'm going to expose services to who the ever subscriber is. And subscribers can be within my enterprise, outside of my enterprise, which is a massive B2B problem. And
yeah.
nobody is actually in networking trying to actually solve these problems. And I look at these guys and it says, guys, we have all the tools the routing guys did. Let's tie this very well with the security guys and tie with this new architecture of arbitrary connections being established and ephemeral connections being established and being brought up and up and down. I was very inspired by, I hired a couple of guys out of LinkedIn, Facebook, and I talked to them constantly. How do you guys build these massive infrastructure? They give you
Yeah.
so much that they had to do in the application layers, microservices architecture, whole serviceless computing. And as I was talking to them, I says, wait a minute, why can't I map this to an MPLS VPN? Why can't I map this to a database like BGP? So I took a lot of inspiration from the cloud guys and started to bring into the networking and make this architecture very user and application centric. And AI needs that whole data centric view rather than
Mm,
connection centric view. And
yeah.
whole
Mm,
architecture of Graphiant is saying network for AI has to be very different than a Cisco router doing route lookups and policy lookups and doing source-based routing. A
yeah.
lot of these functions, as they start to move out and give the application and the AI agents to control my network through this metadata, I think we will have to go this route. We cannot continue. I always tell people one thing. Before we go to the next question, what happened in 2000 when I was at Cisco and we had the crash, we used to say build it and they will come because
Hmm.
network was
Hmm.
being built, the applications were not there. We are in a
Yeah.
reverse cycle. All the AI ecosystem is being built, but the network is not there. Nobody's
Right.
even thinking about network, and
yeah,
network is the biggest impediment to this progress.
yeah. I'm so with you on that. Yeah, and actually, from being a networking guy for like 30 years, and now for the last 10 being very kind of essentially a community leader within IT executives. The gap is so huge. It's so huge, from really where applications are going, computers going, and the networking, is it's like, yeah, it's something. There's a massive opportunity, and some companies will really get it. Khalid, I know you guys get it. It'll be interesting to see you guys, execute, over this business cycle. But it's going to move fast, that's for sure, and the strains are going to really show. I tell you, the one big area, and this is not your area, but like in the data center, um, like I never really kind of gave that much thought to like NVIDIA and the InfiniBand stuff, maybe because like all of my years, like, in kind of data centers, and understanding Ethernet and the innovation that happens there, I just thought that, that will, at over a period of time, it's almost like betting against TCP/IP, betting against Ethernet is just, never really a good thing. Um, and I tell you, and I think I'm still feeling that way. But I think with what Elon did and XAI and what Colossal, where they have 100,000 GPUs connected together with Ethernet, but that was NVIDIA who did that. A big class, no loss, full connectivity, 100,000 GPUs into an Ethernet fabric. You would have thought that that would have came from, Arista or from Cisco, but that was NVIDIA. That
Yeah.
was shocking to me. It's like, hats off to NVIDIA on the compute side. But on the networking side, they solved the big problem that is there. Maybe because they're closest to it, of course, and it's just kind of natural that way. But I would have thought that, it's interesting that, that gap that you just talked about, I thought that was kind of an example of how big that gap is. And there's going to be new players that are stepping up to address it.
Yeah, yeah, and from our perspective, we actually just want to become the wide area is the next frontier, which is not being solved. The wide area
Yeah.
and the internet connectivity. We just want to say the bigger user of the internet in the next decade would be enterprise, not consumers, and devices,
Yeah.
not users. How do we
Oh,
re-architect
no,
for that
yeah.
and protect those whole systems? And uh, we still are trying to do networking the 30, 35-year-old way that we did, or hardware
Yeah.
obsessed.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on that. Because there are all these other like use cases. It's like we know that these data centers AI data centers are extremely expensive. Power, guiding them where they're deployed is by power. And so, like, if you have to have these data centers far away, then you want to be able to kind of network them and bring results back. And so you have a latency issue. That's a big networking problem, and networking can open up a whole wide range of options on where these data centers get built, and that's a wide area networking problem.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's so many kind of use cases, out there. So
And
um,
if you look at it, data centers will chase power. Wherever there is power, data centers are going to get built there. And if you
yeah,
look at this whole announcement, we're working very tightly with a project in Saudi. They're building these massive data centers, and the concept is around data embassies.
uh,
So your sovereign laws will apply because a lot of countries in that region won't be able to build data centers. Saudi
hmm
becomes center of that data center, but then the data sovereignty laws will kick in.
yeah,
Who owns the data? So just like your physical embassy, you will have a data embassy that your sovereign laws will apply, and this is your
yeah,
private data. I see, especially outside of the United States and those countries, emerging countries, this whole idea of massive data centers. It's easier to get fiber than get a power distribution. So wherever there is
yeah,
power, there will be data center, and it's going to get consumed. The one who sells at a lower power will be able to win these massive data processing systems. So for me, that was such a fascinating concept as I started to work with these guys and saying they have about 16 to 18 countries what they can say and said, I'll build data centers for you, but your sovereign laws will apply. And Their finance minister said something which I found very interesting. We are the biggest oil operators, exporters. In 10 years, we want to become biggest data exporters.
Huh.
So
Yeah.
that to me
Interesting.
is that whole build out of that infrastructure. Again, wide area problem because fiber is cheaper to get than power. And
Yeah.
I will build these environments. They have unlimited resources, and then get into this new game at a lower cost data processing.
Yeah. Well, the data sovereignty is a big problem. So I think you have a solution for that. Data stewardship is the other kind of up and coming issue around data. So how do you kind of take care of data, nurture it? How do you feed it into ingest it? Into especially data lakes that AI can feed or basically learn from. So there's it's all about kind of both data manipulation, and the movement, of that data. So I think, your positioning is like, pretty right on there, Khalid. So,
Yeah, and
okay.
technology.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, technology was there. We, the networking guys, were not looking deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very interesting. It's very the industry is still kind of focused around connectivity,
Yeah,
and not about kind of the other services. And there has been clearly a movement around networking and security integration. That's been on, we've been doing that for a long time, but now it's going into the layer deeper, especially around NetOps and SecOps, so like even that integration around the operations models, but also just around the infrastructure, itself. Also, I think the market is just demanding that, and I think we're in for like just an amazing time. This is like, this is almost like, the mid 1990s again. It's like
exactly,
that kind of change, is occurring. Well,
exactly.
Khalid, this was like really great. I'm not sure. Do you have any kind of final thoughts that you want to like leave? Like, do you have like maybe a view of like the next few years, and what you think is going to unfold and proceed, and how you want to manage Graphiant to that?
Graphian's view is about all about data. I want to go to the market and saying we need to evolve the networking infrastructure to a point where it is centered around data, not around connectivity, protection of data, guarantees and SLAs of data, and let the enterprise run the network. We give you a platform. We want to offer this platform to service providers and to enterprise both, and say, here's a
Hmm.
platform which is programmable, which is in your control, which is about your data in transit, data policies should be in your control, not under network's control. Like you said, in the 90s when we built the network was under the control of the service providers. I want to give the control to anybody who wants to actually process and run their data. So
Yeah.
Graphian's view is we're going to build platform. We'll give you the tools. We will standardize our work so that larger adoption happens in the industry. We just want the 2 years advantage, and we want to be very data
Yeah.
centric through this whole metadata extensions. Anybody should be able to write a metadata extension and then program the fabric the way they want to consume it. So make it a very extensible system, which I think is now very rigid because of the way we've been building networking for the past 30 years. We just want to
Yeah.
evolve that to get ready for this new data driven connectivity rather than content driven connectivity.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Awesome. Great. Khalid, thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Same here. I love talking to you.
Great. Thanks, Khalid. And thanks everyone for plugging in as well.